Do you believe in the sovereignty of God? I know we all do. See the sovereignty of God at hand today. It'll be revealed as we go on. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the day. Thank you, you know what we need. Father, thank you for the Word of God that gives us all that we need. For the God of the Word that sustains us day by day. And Father, as we take another look at your Word, I pray that we may allow it to be a mirror to look at our own life. And Father, show us those areas where we need to change. Father, we need to trust you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as Pastor Davies has said, it certainly is a sad day for some. Australia has lost the Ashes, and yes, England have regained them once again. And certainly that little urn is a coveted thing for so many people. Many men will sacrifice hours and many things just for the hope of playing for the Ashes. We know our countries are willing to spend millions of dollars in the hope of being able to regain the Ashes as well. Men have cried when they lost it, which I dare say they've been crying lately. Men have cried when they've won it as well. And it is, in cricket terms, the Holy Grail. Yet we do know that of one man who was involved in the test match where the Ashes were born, and he even has his name written on that little urn that they fight over, thought that worldly glory and all the achievements of playing cricket for his country were but vain when it comes to the glory that God has to offer him. So, Pastor Davies, it's all vain.
Wouldn't be that sorry.
You're chasing bubbles. I don't know if you've ever read what's on the Ashes urn that men have been holding up and kissing lately. But this is what it says. When Ivo goes back with the urn, stud, steel, reed and tile coat, return. The welcome will ring loud, the great crowd will feel proud, seeing Barlow and Bates with the urn, and the rest coming home with the urn. That's what's written on that little urn. Must be very small print, but that's what's there. And so a number of names are mentioned: Ivo Bly, Charles Studd, Alan Steele, Walter Reed, Edward Tolcoat, Richard Barlow and Billy Bates. Now there is one name that stands out there for us, isn't there? C.T. Studd. He has his name written on that urn that everyone's celebrating over today. And he was a test cricketer, one of the up-and-coming stars of the game. Yet we know that he turned his back on the cricket world, all the fame that it brings, all the pleasures and the status that it brings as well. And he chose to serve the Lord as a missionary, first of all in China, then India, then Africa, and lived basically as a nobody. We also know that he came from a very wealthy family, and he received thousands of pounds as an inheritance, and upon receiving that, he gave it all away for the Lord's work. And this man could have been very successful in his days, but he surrendered all that for the Lord. And the question must be asked, why? Why was he willing to make these big sacrifices for the Lord? You know, even in today's circle, Christians, they pursue after so many of these things that he surrendered. And for many Christians, they would consider these things too great of a sacrifice to make for the Lord. Yet this man was willing to sacrifice it all for the sake of Christ. So what's the answer? Well, brethren, he lived by faith. He is quoted as saying, "I know that cricket would not last, and honour would not last, and nothing in this world would last, but it was worthwhile living for the world to come." That's what he is quoted as saying. See, he believed what God had said. He believed that things in this world are only temporal, first of all, but he also believed what God said when he promised that he will give eternal riches to those who faithfully serve him as well. And the faith in this affected his everyday life and affected him in very big ways as well. In fact, he describes those 6 years between his salvation at the age of 18 to when he finally surrendered to the Lord on the mission field as 6 years in an unhappy, backslidden state. And so he describes himself as an unhappy backslider, despite the fact that he was playing cricket for his country at that very moment. You see, God wanted him to sacrifice his cricket career and all the fame and all the pleasure, and he had to make a decision. And he chose to honour the Lord and make that sacrifice. It's quoted as saying, "If Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make to him." That's what he said. And brethren, if we're living by faith, another way that it's going to be seen in our life is we're going to be willing to make sacrifices to our God. And the example that's shown in Hebrews chapter 11, obviously, is Abraham. Abraham shows us that living by faith means that we will be willing to make sacrifices to the Lord. If you look there in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17, we read this in the first verse, or the first part of the verse. It says, "By faith, Abraham, when he was tried," what? "Offered up Isaac." Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son in obedience to his God. Such was his faith for his God. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. If we want to be people that are living by faith, we need to be willing to make sacrifices. And I guess I could sit here and look at the various people. I don't know some of you, and I know some of you fairly well, and I could be thinking, oh well, we've all made our sacrifices in the past. And so we don't really need to hear this. But despite how many sacrifices we have made in the past, we all know there are going to be future sacrifices that are needed to make. And so, brethren, I want to look at this, and I want to turn to a passage that I'm very thankful that Pastor Wally only tiptoed around in Genesis chapter 22. He's very good at tiptoeing around the passages, but I think it only helps the cause, but certainly doesn't wreck anything, so thank you. But in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1, first of all, I want us to see Abraham's proving of obedience. Let me read it to you where it says, "And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am." And so we see here that God wanted to test Abraham, or to prove him. Now, I'm sure that God wasn't sitting up in heaven, scratching his head and thinking to himself, I wonder if Abraham actually does love me. I wonder if Abraham would trust me if I tested him. I better do it just to see if he really does. We know very well what God is like. We know he's all-knowing. We know he's all-wise. We know that God knew what Abraham would do at this time. We know that God knew that Abraham loved him and that Abraham trusted him, and God knew exactly what Abraham was going to do. So this shows me that it was more for Abraham's benefit rather than for God's benefit he did this. You see, God wanted to help Abraham to grow in his faith and help to show Abraham that he did trust in the Lord. And brethren, we can be sure that when God tests us and he calls us